Hi, it's Andy here at Photech Video, and in today's video we're going to look at some test shots taken using this ridiculously cheap KnightX ND2 to ND1000 variable neutral density filter, which can cut out up to 10 stops of light, which means that it can reduce the amount of light which hits your sensor by 1,000 times. And when I say that it was ridiculously cheap, it cost me less than €8 new, which is less than $10 US. Stick around because I think this is going to be very interesting. So recently I uploaded a video where I took some test shots using a CPL, a circular polarizing filter manufactured by the same company as this, which is KnightX. If you're interested in seeing that video, you can watch it in the link up here. First of all, this video is not sponsored, and I paid for this cheap variable neutral density filter with my own money, which, as you can see, cost me €7.99, which is less than $10 US. But is it any good, and what is it supposed to do? That's what we're here to find out. So what is an ND filter, and what is a variable ND filter? Well, an ND filter is a piece of glass or plastic which is not 100% transparent. We put it in front of our lens and it cuts out some of that light, a bit like the sunglasses which we use for our eyes to also reduce the amount of light hitting our eyes. ND filters only have one value, which could be 2, 4, 8, 10, for example, and this number refers to the amount of stops of light which the filter restricts from hitting our camera's sensor. Sometimes an ND filter may have a different type of number designation, like ND2, which is a one-stop filter, ND4, which is a two-stop filter, ND8, which is a three-stop filter, etc. Normal ND filters are more recommended for still photography, as it's important to calculate your exposure correctly. And by knowing the shutter speed for a correct exposure without the ND filter, it's a simple procedure to calculate a slower or longer shutter speed required for a correct exposure with a fixed ND filter attached to our lens. And there are a number of free apps which you can download to your phone which will calculate this shutter speed in an instant. I use a free app on my Android phone which is called Exposure Calculator. Variable density filters have a rotating ring, similar to a CPL filter. When you rotate the ring, the opacity gets greater or lesser. And of course, that will depend on the values of the variable ND filter which you have. So why would you want to use an ND filter or a variable ND filter? Well, there are a number of reasons. One of those reasons is that you may want to create a long exposure image, but the image would be overexposed by using the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO which you want to use for that particular image. By attaching a neutral density filter to our lens, we can slow down the shutter speed by the number of stops of the neutral density filter itself. This will allow us to be able to take artistic photos of the sea, for example, of waterfalls or other fast-moving subjects which we would like to give the illusion of slower or calmer movement or some type of motion blur. Neutral density filters are often used on bright days when the image would be overexposed even at a normal shutter speed. Of course, for still images you have the possibility of increasing your shutter speed or making it faster, which will of course reduce the amount of light which hits your sensor. However, we can't really do that for video recordings because you may want to keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate so as to create natural looking movement. Imagine that on a bright day you're recording your video at 24 frames per second and therefore you want to set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second to keep those movements looking natural. But when you set your aperture to the f-stop which you want for artistic reasons and your ISO to the minimum which your camera will allow you to reduce sensitivity to light, the video is still overexposed. That is when you would want to use a neutral density filter, and of course preferably a variable neutral density filter. Because as you move your camera around, the light hitting the sensor will change, and you can rotate your variable neutral density filter to compensate for that light on the fly. A neutral density filter can also be used to help you to create the illusion of making moving objects or subjects disappear from your image. I recently uploaded a video on how to do this, and if you want, you can link in up here to watch it. Just like the CPL filter from the same brand, this cheap variable ND filter did not come in a nice case or pouch. In fact, it came in this cheap plastic envelope. But if the ND filter does its job, I'm happy to carry it around in this cheap plastic envelope. The rings themselves seem to be made of some type of metal, but I suspect that the filter is made of plastic. I must say that the ring is smooth and doesn't make too much noise as you rotate it. I bought the 77mm filter thread, which as you can see is attached to a number of step-up rings because my Sony a5100 has the kit lens attached, the 16 to 50mm f3.5 to f5.6 kit lens, and the filter thread on this lens is only 40.5mm. So I use these step-up rings to make it possible to use a larger filter on the camera. And that is a good tip to remember. So that you only need to buy one filter for all your lenses, buy a filter with the thread which corresponds to the largest filter thread that you have on your lenses. Then get yourself some cheap step-up rings and you'll be able to use the same filter on all of your lenses. So if we look at the printing on the outside of the rotating ring, we see that we have the brand KnightX. It says slim, and it's quite true, it's not very thick. ND Vario 2 to 1077mm. It also has a mark showing the minimum and the maximum points for opacity effect. However, it doesn't have numbers which equate to the different light stops which we would be reducing by. Instead, there are a series of dashes which begin very thin in the minimum area and get thicker and thicker near the maximum area. So I can only assume that if the minimum point is correct and the maximum point is correct, then we can only really know when we are cutting out exactly one stop or exactly 10 stops of light. All the rest is guesswork. Okay, so that's enough talking about what an ND filter is and what it can do. Let's see how I set up these test shots and what I was looking for in the images. Well, first I recorded a short video showing how the light hitting the sensor is reduced as you rotate the ring on the variable neutral density filter. I recorded the video at 1080p Full HD at 50 frames per second, and I set my shutter speed to double that frame rate, which is 1/100th of a second. I set my aperture to f8, which is the sweet spot on this Sony kit lens, and I set my ISO to automatic. And the reason that I set my ISO to automatic is that as I rotate this ring to increase the opacity of the neutral density filter, the light hitting the sensor will be reduced, and therefore the automatic ISO will compensate for that, changing automatically. So in theory, the only thing that should change in this video clip is the ISO value until the neutral density filter cuts out so much light that the auto ISO can no longer compensate. And therefore the image will begin to get darker and there'll be more grain in the image because of the higher ISO. So as I rotate the ring on this variable neutral density filter, the image should remain the same until it begins to get darker. The colors in the image should also remain the same as I rotate the dial. What we're trying to see is if the colors remain consistent as I rotate the ring on this cheap variable neutral density filter. what we don't want to see is a horrible color cast right across the image. The video and the images which I'm going to show you are all 100% straight out of camera, so that you can decide for yourself the effect which this cheap variable neutral density filter is having on the image, and whether it's worth spending that $10 or not. And finally, another effect that we don't want to see is the dreaded X pattern. Cheap variable ND filters are known for creating an X effect in the image as you get near to the darker part of the spectrum. So the three things that we want to see in the images are consistency in exposure, consistency in color, and no X effect. Well, as you can see in this video, as I rotate the ring on the variable neutral density filter, the exposure is changing and also the colors are not consistent. The exposure should not change because the ISO is compensating for it, and the colors should not change either. We can also see that as the image begins to go dark, because the camera's ISO can no longer compensate, the dreaded X begins to appear. For the still images, first I took a couple of correctly exposed shots without the variable ND filter attached, so that we can see the true colors of a correctly exposed still without the ND filter. Then I took a couple of photos with my shutter speed set to 4 seconds and to 8 seconds, with my aperture set to f/18 and again my ISO set to automatic. I then rotated the ring on the variable neutral density filter to the point where my ISO indicator stopped flashing in my camera, which meant that I had a correct exposure. Again, the exposures should all look the same, and there should be no difference in the colors as I increase or decrease the strength of the variable neutral density filter. However, as you can see, neither the exposure nor the color is consistent. And again, we can see the dreaded X effect. Well, there you have it. Test shots using the KnightX ND2 to ND1000 variable neutral density filter, which cost just $10 US. I have to be honest, I really didn't expect anything better for the price. And unfortunately, in all fairness, I really cannot recommend it to you. I really do wish that I could recommend it and that I had picked up a bargain. But unfortunately, on this occasion, I didn't get the bargain, and I think that I'll probably just throw it away. Please leave your comments and questions in the comment section down below, and tell us if you have any experience using ND or variable ND filters, and if you have any experience using cheaper versions like this one. We'd love to know. Maybe you've been luckier than I have. Remember that this is my opinion from the experience which I've had doing these tests. Your experience and opinion on the same filter may be completely different. I hope you found this video interesting and useful. If you did, please give it a like and share it with any friends or family who you think may also find it interesting. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe, and while you're at it, ring on that notification bell to be notified every time a new video drops on my channel. You'll find affiliate links to gear used in the making of this video in the description section down below. I haven't included a link to this cheap variable neutral density filter, but if you are still interested in it, I'm sure you'll be able to find it by doing a search on Ali. If you decide to purchase something through one of my affiliate links, thank you for directly supporting the channel. The price to you will be the same, and I will receive a small commission which will help me to continue creating content for you here on my channel. So until the next time, this is Andy at Photech Video signing off. Take care and be safe.